Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for Chapter 8. I really hope that you have been enjoying the book just as much as we have. We love that you're tuning in to read with us, even though we are not in school doing this. So I'm here to read Chapter 8. So before we get started, some vocab that is going to come up in this chapter. The first word is an adjective, so it describes a noun. The word is monotonous. And it means a boring or dull way of speaking. So if somebody is monotonous, they kind of talk like this, they don't really show a lot of emotion when they're talking, that's monotonous. Another word that will come up is a noun meaning abundance. And this is if you have a lot of something or if you are very full. So for many of us, there was not an abundance of toilet paper. So when somebody first found like a big stock of toilet paper, you may have bought it all and then have found an abundance. Another word that we are going to use that you will see is a noun called spoke. Now you might think of this like, oh, I know this word. I spoke something. If something was spoken, that's a verb. We'll see it in this chapter being used as a noun, and it's a small bar in a wheel that supports the rim. So if you guys spend a lot of time biking, you know what those spokes are, because if you have your bike wheel, they're the little things that like kind of go in. Those are the spokes. We also have an adverb called gaily in this chapter. So this is referring to, it's an adverb, and the verb that it comes from is the verb gay. Now, gay here is not the sexual orientation. Gay is a word that means to be happy. So if someone is described as being gaily doing something, it means that they're happy or joyful. It's not talking about their sexual orientation. There's also a verb called dismounted, and that basically means to get off of something. Dis as a prefix means like off or apart, and to mount something means that you kind of get on top of it. So dismount means that you are getting off of it. And the verb vanish, I think that most of you know this word, but if something vanishes, it basically means that it is disappeared really quickly. All right, so jumping into chapter 8, we start off as always with Naya's story. So chapter 8, Southern Sudan, 2008. It was like music, the sound of Akir's laugh. Naya's father had decided that Akir needed a doctor. If you remember, Akir is Naya's sister. So Naya and her mother had taken Akir to the special place, a big white tent full of people who were sick or hurt, with doctors and nurses to help them. After just 2 doses of medicine, Akir was nearly her old self again. Still thin and weak, but able to laugh as Naya sat on the floor next to her cot and played a clapping game with her. The nurse, a white woman, was talking to Naya's mother. Her sickness came from the water, the nurse explained. She should drink only good, clean water. If the water is dirty, you should boil it for a count of 200 before she drinks it. So what the nurse is saying, that she wants Naya's mom to do something like this and boil the water that they get from the lake in order to sanitize it. Naya's mother nodded that she understood, but Naya could see the worry in her eyes. The water from the holes in the lake bed could be collected only in tiny amounts. If her mother tried to boil such a small amount, the pot would be dry long before they could count to 200. So they're not getting enough water in order to sanitize it like this. It was a good thing then that they would soon be returning to the village. The water that Naya fetched from the pond in the plastic jug could be boiled before they drank it. But what about next year at camp and the year after that? And even at home, whenever Naya made the long, hot walk to the pond, she had to drink as soon as she got there. She would never be able to stop Akir from doing the same. So, this idea of sanitizing water before you drink it seems like it's going to be very hard for the family to do, especially during the dry season when they have to go to that other place to live. All right, switching to Salva's story. Southern Sudan, 1985. The lake's surface was calm, and once the boats had pulled away from the shore, there was not much to see, just water and more water. Remember, they made these boats out of the reeds, and they're trying to cross the Nile. They paddled for hours. The scenery and motion were so monotonous that Salva might have slept, except he was afraid that if he did, he might fall over the side. He kept himself awake by counting the strokes of Uncle's paddle and trying to gauge how far the canoe traveled with every 20 strokes. Finally, the boats pulled up to an island in the middle of the river. This is where the fishermen of the Nile lived and worked. Salva was amazed by what he saw in the fishing community. It was the first place in their weeks of walking that had an abundance of food. And remember, abundance just means that there's a lot of it. The villagers ate a lot of fish, of course, and hippo and crocodile meat as well. But even more impressive were the number of crops that they grew. Cassava, sugarcane, yams. It was easy to grow food when there was a whole river to water the crops. In areas where you don't have a lot of water, it's very hard to farm. None of the travelers had money or anything of value to trade, so they had to beg for food. The exception was Uncle. The fisherman gave him food without having to be asked. Salva could not tell if this was because Uncle seemed to be the leader of the group or because they were afraid of his gun. Uncle shared his food with Salva, a piece of sugar cane to suck on right away, and then fish that they cooked over a fire and yams roasted in the ashes. The sugar cane juice soothed the sharpest edge of Salva's hunger. He was able to eat the rest of the meal slowly, making each bite last a long time. At home, Salva had never been hungry. His family owned many cattle. They were among the better off families in their village of Laun Arik. They ate mostly porridge made of sorghum and milk. Every so often, his father went to the marketplace by bicycle and brought home bags of beans and rice. These had been grown elsewhere because few crops could be raised in the dry, semi-desert region of Laun Arik. So again, they don't have a lot of water in that spot, so they're not able to eat a lot of crops with fresh fruit and vegetables because it's too dry to grow anything. As a special treat, his father sometimes brought mangoes. A bag of mangoes was awkward to carry, especially when the bicycle was already loaded with other goods. So he wedged the mangoes into the spokes of his bicycle wheels. I know that this is a picture of bananas, but picture these are the spokes. And so the father would take little tiny mangoes and put them inside of the spokes as he drove. When Salva ran to greet him when he had the mangoes in the tire spokes, he could see the green-skinned mangoes spinning gaily or happily in a blur as his father pedaled. Salva would take a mango from the spokes almost before his father had dismounted. His mother would peel it for him, its juicy insides the same color as her headscarf. She would slice the flesh away from the big flat seed. Salva loved the sweet slices, but his favorite part was the seed. There was always plenty of fruit that clung stubbornly to the seed. He would nibble and suck at it to get every last shred, making it last for hours. There were no mangoes among the fisherman's great stores, but sucking on his piece of sugar cane reminded Salva of those happier times. He wondered if he would ever again see his father riding a bicycle with mangoes in its spokes. So remember, he doesn't know what happened to his father. As the sun touched the horizon, the fishermen abruptly went into their nets. They weren't really nets, just white mosquito netting hung or draped to make a space so they could lie down inside. Not one fisherman stayed to talk or eat more or do anything else. It was almost as if they all vanished or disappeared at the same moment. Only a few minutes later, mosquitoes rose up from the water, from the reeds, from everywhere. Huge dark clouds of them appeared, their high-pitched whine filling the air. Thousands, maybe millions of hungry mosquitoes massed so thickly that in one breath, Salva could have ended up with a mouthful if he wasn't careful. And even if he was, they were everywhere, in his eyes, nose, ears, on every part of his body. I hate bugs. This sounds horrible. The fishermen stayed in their nets the whole night long. They had even dug channels from inside the nets to just beyond them so they could urinate without having to leave their little tents. It didn't matter how often Salva swatted at the mosquitoes, or that one swat killed dozens at a time. For every one he killed, it seemed that hundreds more swarmed in to take its place. With their high singing whine constantly in his ears, Salva slapped and waved at them in frustration all night long. No one in the group got any sleep. The mosquitoes were sure of that. In the morning, Salva was covered with bites. The worst ones were in the exact middle of his back where he couldn't reach to scratch. Those he could reach, though, he scratched until they bled. The travelers got into the boats one more time to paddle from the island to the other side of the Nile. The fishermen had warned the group to take plenty of water for the next stretch of their journey. Salva still had the gourd that the old woman had given him. Others in the group had gourds too, or plastic bottles. But there were some who did not have a container. They tore strips from their clothing and soaked them in a desperate attempt to carry at least a little water with them. Ahead lay the most difficult part of their journey, the Akobo Desert. Thank you for reading with us. That's the end of chapter 8. Please stay tuned for tomorrow's reading of chapter 9. Bye, everybody.